Alrighty. Thank you so much for coming to speak with us, Thendral. We're so excited to have you at My Networker. So, our first question is, can you please just tell us about yourself?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me on here, Gia. I really appreciate it. I really appreciate all you do at My Networker. It's amazing being involved as a mentor. As a former high school student myself, I'm an undergraduate student now. But I still remember some of the obstacles I had to navigate, especially being an international student who was applying to universities in the U.S. There were quite a few obstacles. And there were I was always, I always wished I had like a big sister to look up to, or who I could ask questions, who I could just like, hey, what is your opinion on this? What is your opinion on that? And I really wish I had that person for me. And looking back, I realize that I would like to be that person for high school students. So that's really my whole motive for joining My Networker and helping out as a mentor for high school students. So, but yeah, thank you so much for having me on here. It's a huge pleasure. And yeah, I'm sorry for stretching it out a bit too long. I'm happy to tell you about myself. So my name is Thendral Kamal. I am currently 21 years old. I'm turning 22 in just over a month. And I'll be going into my junior year at Purdue University, where I'm studying aerospace engineering. And this summer, I'm currently involved as an aircraft structural support co-op at Delta Airlines. And I have a variety of internship experiences that I'm able to talk about, that I'm able to draw from. And last summer, one of these internship experiences being last summer, I worked as a space sustainability intern at SES Satellites in Washington, D.C., where I was connected to the company through the Brooke Owens Fellowship.
Wow.
A little bit about my passion is when I was 10 years old, I looked through a telescope for the first time. And I like to say that I became awestruck by the pale gray surface of the moon that I saw. And I decided that I was going to stay awestruck by space for the rest of my life. And this lifelong obsession with space exploration, rockets, aviation, and combined with my love for public speaking, mentorship, and presenting, this also began an interest in science communication. And this is what led me down various avenues at Purdue University, from becoming the first international student to win the Brooke Owens Fellowship in 2023. To currently doing my co-op at Delta Airlines and even an internship at SES Satellites. So ultimately, my ambition is to become the first Indian woman to set foot on the planet Mars. This is a very lofty goal, but every lofty goal can be accomplished. It is accomplished by taking the first few steps. And that is what I'm working on currently. I'm taking my steps towards becoming an astronaut. Becoming an astronaut means also being a really good engineer, being a really good thinker, a really good problem solver. And that's what my goal is right now as a young professional in the space and aviation industry, is to become as good a problem solver, as good of a, someone who's able to take on challenges, have the technical background, have the skills able to tackle these challenges, and apply them, and become just a really good engineer before becoming an astronaut candidate at NASA or wherever it is I choose to go to in the future. But yeah, that's about myself. Some of my hobbies include scuba diving. I like theater, as I mentioned earlier. I was very heavily involved in speech and debate in high school. I also really like hiking. A little bit about my interest in speech and debate. When I was 16 years old, I gave a TEDx talk titled "We Choose to Go to Mars" at Amity University in Dubai, United Arab Emirates. This talk I basically spoke about the importance of investing in crewed missions to Mars. And this experience volunteering, I also had an experience volunteering at the Sharjah Planetarium. And all of these, past experiences grew me into the person I am today. And this, really grew my passion for speaking about space to, audiences around the globe, and especially young professionals like myself, especially young high school students who are also getting started on their career paths, like they're taking that first step. So I really like talking to people. I really like telling them to follow their passions, and using my past experiences as examples of how things eventually work out, and you are able to follow your passions despite systemic barriers, despite barriers because of your gender, because of being an international student in the US, any kind of barrier, you are still able to pursue your dreams. So these are the kinds of things I talk about. But yeah, that's about myself, and yeah, really excited for this fireside chat. Thank you for having me.
Wow, that is so incredible. It's awesome being able to think about how you as a teenager or as a kid has grown into this incredible person who has these dreams to land, to be the first Indian woman on Mars. It's just awesome. And I'm so excited to see you become the first Indian woman on Mars because, yeah, this is going to be really, really great. So, the first question I have after your intro is, can you please tell us about your specific studies at Purdue?
Sure, yeah. So, as I mentioned, I'm currently pursuing my bachelor's degree in aeronautical and astronautical engineering at Purdue University. Apart from pursuing my degree, I'm also minoring in political science, where Brooke Owens Fellows were invited to the White House. We got to meet with policymakers, and we got to speak and participate in a discussion of the National Space Council, where we talked about expanding outreach and access to rural communities in America, especially, how can we bring more aerospace? How can we bring more STEM to minorities and kids in these rural communities in America? So that was a really eye-opening conversation
Yeah.
for me, and I became, super excited about the idea of space and science outreach through policy, and that is what led me to pursue my minor in political science. So that's something I do besides taking classes that towards my degree in aerospace engineering. I'm also involved in the Value Through Reliability, Safety, and Sustainability Lab, where this upcoming semester I will be starting as a research assistant. I'll be doing research into aircraft maintenance and how we can reduce aircraft incidents and accidents, commercial aviation incidents and accidents, through the maintenance side of things. Other things I'm involved in. I'm the outreach committee chair at the Society of Women Engineers, where the focus of the outreach committee is to expand STEM outreach and to bring STEM activities, inspire young girls and in the Lafayette community around Purdue University, get them involved in STEM activities. But yeah, just bringing aerospace, bringing STEM, bringing what we learn in classes at Purdue to a more kid-friendly level to get kids interested in pursuing degrees in STEM, especially young girls in the greater Lafayette community. But apart from that, let's see, Purdue. Yeah, that's pretty much it for my studies at Purdue.
Wow, that's so great. It's incredible seeing how you use your work to actually make real impact outside of just your studies. Yeah. So, can you tell us more about your internship at Delta?
Sure, yeah. So at Delta, I'm currently doing what's known as a co-op, which is an extended internship. But it's really special in that you don't just spend like a set amount of time, like, a year or so at Delta. It's you alternate between work and school. So you work one semester at Delta, and then you go back to school, you go back to Purdue or wherever it is you study, and you study that one semester. So it's alternating semesters, and the co-op usually is like 3 semesters long. I'm currently in my third semester at Delta Airlines. I currently work in aircraft structural support in the component engineering division.
Wow.
So pretty much what we do is we look at, like, all any components on the aircraft that need maintenance. We work on. So you name it: airframe, landing gear, mechanical structures on the aircraft. We provide maintenance support for on all Delta aircraft fleets, as well as customer fleets that send their airplanes to be, essentially maintained and repaired, overhauled at our facility in Atlanta. So my work mainly focuses on composite structures. But I also dabble in some sheet metal structures as well. But that's pretty much the basis of what I do at Delta as a co-op. Apart from the co-op and like the day-to-day responsibilities, last semester I was also involved as the president of the co-op committee, planning events for other co-ops, just helping to create a community of co-ops within Delta Airlines, get more involved in the greater Atlanta community. Yeah. And have events to socialize after work. But yeah, those are just a couple of the things I do at Delta.
Oh, that's incredible. So, can you also, I know you discussed a previous internship that you had. Can you talk about your work as a sustainability intern and what that entailed?
Sure, yeah. So this internship was actually through the Brooke Owens Fellowship, which is the Brooke Owens Fellowship, very, very briefly, is an award-winning, it's a national fellowship that is offered to it's super competitive.
Yeah.
And it is offered to, women of color and other female minorities in the aerospace industry. Sorry, I should correct myself. Female and other gender minorities in the aerospace industry who are looking for aerospace careers. So, you can have any background. You can have a STEM background. You can have a background in journalism. But as long as you're interested in pursuing a career in the space industry, the Brooke Owens Fellowship is one such fellowship that recognizes and uplifts the careers of these gender minorities and women in, who are interested in the aerospace industry. And it was the fellowship was founded in honor of the late Dawn Brooke Owens, who tragically passed away due to cancer a few years ago. She was a trailblazer in the aerospace aviation industry, and yeah, this fellowship was founded by her close friends and mentors in honor of her, and in order to uplift many of the women and many of the gender minorities who are doing great work already in wherever it is they are, or just like Brooke Owens. And I applied for one of my dreams, in high school was to apply for this fellowship and to, do an internship through the fellowship, because one of the aspects of the fellowship is that they offer a paid internship at an aerospace company in the U.S. And I did my internship through Brooke Owens Fellowship at SES Satellites. SES Satellites is a satellite operator and provider. They have satellites globally across the world. And they're mainly based in Belgium, but they have offices here in Washington, D.C., Virginia, and so on. I had the privilege of working at the D.C. office, where I worked as a Space Sustainability Intern. My team was based across the world, so it was really cool. It had its pros and cons, but getting to navigate time zones and stuff like that, it was interesting. But we worked on essentially creating a life cycle assessment for their satellite, which is planned to be launched later this year, the SES-24 satellite. Essentially creating a life cycle assessment for any, not just a satellite, for anything, is to examine the carbon impact for that was, the carbon impact of the product from conception to retirement. So, what is the impact of this particular product on the environment from the point where it is first, conceived and manufactured, to testing stages, to being launched in the case of a satellite, and then retired, and then eventually burned up in the atmosphere. What is the environmental impact of this product? Essentially examining that and putting that into hard numbers is what a life cycle assessment does. To my knowledge, no such life cycle assessment has been performed in the commercial satellite industry before. So SES is working towards making essentially the first of its kind in the industry, and it was really cool to be able to work on that. I got to participate in literature reviews. I got to participate in discussions with contractors, with the satellite manufacturers, talking to them about creating this life cycle assessment. But yeah, it was really cool because, when we think about launching into space, when we think about the space and aviation industry, sustainability is often an overlooked factor in design and manufacturing. So it was really cool to be able to work on that side of things. but yeah, that's essentially what I did at SES Satellites. That was a really awesome experience. Very different to what I'm used to doing engineering work. It was less engineering work and more systemic, like, systems optimization,
Right.
and essentially nitpicking every single process that's been put into place so far. So it was very different from what I'm used to, but it was good. It was a great challenge for me, and definitely a great addition into my resume.
Yeah, incredible. I know that there's a
Mm-hmm.
lot of space debris, especially with the amount of satellites
Mm-hmm.
that go up into orbit. So hearing that there are actually people thinking about sustainability when it comes to satellites is really inspiring, and it gives me a lot of hope. Um,
Yep, absolutely.
all right, so my next question sort of goes back to your experience at Purdue. I know that you are a lifeguard, so does that connect with your aspirations to become an astronaut, and how did you get into that?
That's a great question. So I'm not currently working as a lifeguard. I did do part-time work as a lifeguard in my freshman year, but it's really interesting, and I'm really glad you brought that up because being a lifeguard is definitely connected to being an astronaut. One of the most important skills that you learn from being a lifeguard, getting your American Red Cross certification, is anticipating something going wrong.
Yeah.
Like always thinking what the worst case scenario could be, and always being prepared to handle that worst case scenario, no matter what it throws at you.
Right.
A lot of it is making risk assessments in your head, and knowing how to act in the event of a trouble, like looking for trouble before it happens, right? um, so that definitely connects to my dream of becoming an astronaut, for the reasons I just mentioned. And like becoming an astronaut definitely is a very challenging, physically, mentally, it is an incredibly challenging process. And I like to think of, like, the fact that I went through lifeguard training as like a precursor to the astronaut training that I'll have to go through years and years from now. Lifeguard training is pretty grueling, and it was a lot of fun, but it definitely was physically and mentally challenging.
Yeah.
Knowing how to help people in trouble, knowing preparing yourself mentally and physically to like jump in the water and be able to take on any challenge that comes both inside and outside the water. That quick decision making skill will definitely come in handy in space, which is as you know, a very unforgiving environment. Anything
Yeah.
could go wrong, and even if something very small goes wrong, that could mean a fatality for the astronauts involved. So being able to have like those quick decision making skills are incredibly helpful. That's something that being a lifeguard um, helps you develop. So that's how I would say being a lifeguard is connected to my dreams of becoming an astronaut. And it's also really interesting. I wanted to this anecdote comes to mind, but um, when I was interviewing for my current position at Delta Airlines, I I was at the career fair at Purdue, and we call it Industrial Roundtable. We have close to 100 companies come to Purdue and set up booths and advertise their
Right.
opportunities to undergraduate students, master students. Delta Airlines was one such company. And the way it's laid out is that all these companies set up their booths outside on this massive, park where we call it. Yeah, it's just like this massive open space. And this career fair usually happens in the middle of early September to mid September, which is when it's super warm in Indiana. The sun is like blazing down on you. People are in like three-piece suits and they're sweating constantly. But yeah, I just want you to picture that in your head.
Yeah.
And there are lines and lines of students that stand waiting to talk to these recruiters, right? So you can expect to wait in a line for like 30, 40, upwards of like 30, 40 minutes. And it's incredibly challenging. Especially when you're wearing like a dress or like a blazer, you know what I mean? Like formal
Yeah.
clothes,
Right.
right? Because you want to make a good impression on the recruiter. So I was standing in line to speak to Delta Airlines. And something that a lot of people don't consider is that, yes, it's super hot, and yes, it's super stuffy, and yes, we're all uncomfortable. We're uncomfortable as students, but nobody really thinks about the recruiters
Right.
and how uncomfortable they must be feeling. And as I stood in line, I saw one recruiter was like, going red in the face, and he was like exhibiting basically classic signs of a heat stroke.
Yeah.
And I knew that because I was a lifeguard. And I know to look out for heat stroke symptoms so that I can help people before they faint and collapse, right?
Right.
So I see this recruiter, and he's going red in the face, and he's sweating, and he's like struggling to breathe.
Right.
And then before I can begin speaking to this other recruiter, I stop the conversation, and then I ask this other recruiter, hey, are you doing okay? I'm a trained lifeguard, and I can see that you're exhibiting signs of a heat stroke. You might want to sit down and drink some water.
Right.
And then he says, yeah, thank you for pointing that out. I didn't even realize that I was, people, heat stroke often, especially when you're like overexerting yourself, heat stroke can affect you, and you won't even know you have heat stroke until you faint. And if you've ever been in that position. So I saw him, and then I was like, would you like a glass of water? You should sit down, essentially. And then he was like, yeah, wow, thanks for noticing that, and thank you for pointing that out. And then he sat down, took a drink of water. The recruiter I was talking to, this other recruiter, he was very impressed by what he saw.
Right.
And then after I got hired, after all was said and done, I still kept in touch with that recruiter. We became good friends since. And I asked him. We had lunch together in the first couple months of me joining Delta, and I asked him. This is like for my own feedback for the future. What was the point you decided you were going to hire me?
Yeah.
During that 2-minute conversation we had at the career fair. And he said, I've been to 16, 17, I'd been to 16, 17 campuses across the US by that point. And I talked to hundreds and hundreds of students. And almost every other day, we were in a campus under the beating sun. And we were essentially drinking water, getting by. But it was very difficult. And of all the hundreds and hundreds of students, only you thought to ask how we were doing. And only you thought to stop us and to say, hey, are you doing okay? And he said that mattered to me because, yes, you had the skills. Yes, you were a stellar candidate. I mean, we're at Purdue. It's one of the best engineering colleges in the US.
Yeah.
Everyone's going to be talented. Everyone's going to have the skills they need to be a good engineer at Delta Airlines. But you stood out to me from all these hundreds and hundreds of students because of your compassion.
Right.
And you embodied one of the values at Delta Airlines, which we hold in very high regard. We consider ourselves a family, and as a family, we always look out for each other.
Wow.
So the fact that you stopped us, looked out for this recruiter, this person you have never met before, was very telling of your personality, and I knew you would fit right in at Delta.
Wow.
So that was the point I decided to hire you. And I always use this as a way to tell people that no matter what you do, no matter where you go in life, always hold on to what makes you you.
Yeah.
Don't be afraid to show that authentic side of yourself. Like, my compassion is unique about me, apparently so in this scenario where that recruiter hired me because I was one of the only compassionate students who thought to reach out and ask if the other recruiter was doing okay. So I always tell students, hold on to that part of you.
Yeah.
And make sure that the world sees that side of you.
Yeah.
Whatever opportunity arises for you to showcase that part of your personality, do so, because it will pay down in the long run. It will absolutely pay in the long run. And so it's just it's an anecdote that comes to mind when we talk about lifeguarding, because I would have never known to look out for the symptoms of heat stroke if I had not learned what to look out for as a lifeguard.
Wow.
So that's something so lifeguarding was definitely a huge it was a great experience for me in my early career as a young professional. It's not a fancy schmancy engineering internship, but it was definitely something that built my skills, that built my compassion, that built me to anticipate danger before it occurs, and to constantly be forming these risk assessments in my mind. So that's lifeguarding.
Wow, that's an incredible story. It really goes into detail about how much empathy and compassion matters, whether you're at a job or whether you're just meeting other people or you're networking with other people. That's truly incredible. All right. So, my next question is, how has mentorship impacted you specifically?
Yeah, absolutely. Mentorship is something I value. I hold it very close to my heart. And because ever since I was in middle school, it's thanks to mentors that I was able to develop my passion. I was able to pursue my dreams. It's because of teachers, it's because of, adults, parents, sometimes even people my own age who stepped into my life and who encouraged me, who championed me, and, who I knew I could always count on, who are always going to be in my corner even if things went south in my career.
Right.
One of the best mentors I've had is Kelly Girardi. She's
Wow,
an
yeah.
astronaut.
I
Yeah,
know Kelly Girardi. She's
yeah,
incredible.
Kelly's awesome. And talking to her about her journey, from a non-aerospace background to where she is now as an astronaut
Right.
is incredibly inspiring. To keep going and to follow similar steps, and we're able to imagine ourselves in our mentor's shoes. That's what's always been the most important to me as a
Right.
mentor. Um, it's incredibly important that my mentee is able to imagine themselves in my shoes.
Yeah.
If I'm someone they look up to, um, I want them to be able to imagine themselves in my shoes, because that's always what I craved as a mentee.
Yeah.
Whenever I asked someone if they could mentor me when I was younger, it was always, can I imagine myself in their shoes?
Right.
Can I look at them and do I see myself doing the same things that they do? And so mentorship has very, deeply impacted me, and it's been one of the biggest reasons I'm able to stay motivated on this journey of becoming an astronaut, and of following these, massive dreams that may not make sense right now, but I know will make sense in the future. um, Mentors have been one of the biggest reasons I've been able to stay focused and motivated on this um, on this path to my ambitions.
Wow. Yeah. I know as a high school student, being able to see people like you or on social media, Kelly Girardi, and these science communicators who easily talk about STEM. And I'm sure when you talk to communities at Girls Who Code or various other or Girl Scouts, I think you recently went to Girl Scouts, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I spoke with those
Yeah,
guys
that's
recently.
awesome. Yeah. Um, People are directly impacted to keep going and stay motivated and finish high school, finish college, go on into their careers. Yeah, it's amazing being able to talk to people like you. All right. So, the next question I have is, have you ever been impacted by discrimination in the STEM industry, whether it's because you're an international student or a woman?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, as an international student, so one of the I'm not sure how well known this is, but um, almost, I want to say 85 to 90% of job opportunities, career opportunities in the aerospace industry are closed off to international students because of ITAR restrictions, because of U.S. export control
Yeah.
laws. Uh, Put simply, it's because aerospace as a whole falls under this umbrella of defense.
Yeah.
Which is like, you can ask, you can, you might be wondering, what about commercial aviation? Like, what about companies like Delta Airlines,
Right.
United Airlines? That's not defense, right? So it's a very unfortunate sort of, like, unfortunate how aerospace as a whole just is squarely defined as defense. It really shouldn't be that way. But unfortunately, that's how it is in the United States.
Yeah.
And because it falls under the umbrella of defense as a category, um, international students are barred from most job opportunities, most internship opportunities. So I will say that that's been one of the biggest barriers to myself and many other students like me, who are, essentially doing amazing things in the aerospace industry, who are achieving really, cool, like doing really cool things, doing
Right.
really cool research work. And unfortunately, the world, well, not the world, the United States sees them first by their passport and where they're from, their birth country, and then for their achievements.
Yeah.
So they could succeed, they could do as much in the aerospace industry, but they will always be defined by their passport. And this is incredibly discriminatory, and and it's very unfortunate that this is how international students who are incredibly talented are recognized in the U.S. And as an international student myself, this has been one of the biggest barriers to applying to engineering careers, like at Boeing, Lockheed Martin, some of these amazing, space companies who are doing impressive work in the aerospace industry, and even doing certain forms of research at Purdue University requires citizenship. So that's been one of the biggest, I would say, obstacles in the way of international students. And however, things are changing, and companies are starting to recognize that not all space and aviation work is defense. Absolutely not. Like, I'm not companies like Lockheed Martin. It's a different story. But if you look at NASA, if you look at Delta Airlines, if you look at non-defense centric companies, commercial aviation companies, companies building drones for, Zipline is a great example of a company who, their drones are used to deliver medical health supplies to underrepresented to communities, to rural communities. So companies are starting to recognize that more and more, and I'm hoping that as I speak more about my experiences as an international student to the Girl Scouts, at conferences like the one I did recently at Indiana University about overcoming adversity and following your dreams, I'm hoping the more I speak about it, the more awareness there is around this, and the more people realize how big of an issue this is. And in order to be able to in order for the U.S. to be able to tap into some of its best and brightest talent at universities, it needs to realize that international students are a very underutilized resource, especially in the aerospace industry.
Right.
So I would say that is the biggest level of biggest obstacle I've faced so far as a young professional.
Can you talk more about your volunteering work? You already touched on you help talk to a lot of kids and students, but can you talk about that a little bit more?
My network, HER, is one example of free mentorship services that I'm involved with. I provide free mentoring services to undergraduate students, high school students. I talk to audiences, of young professionals about my journey in STEM, about essentially pursuing your passions, continuing to pursue your dreams in the face of adversity. So that's one huge thing that I do, which is free mentorship services. I'm also involved at the Brooke Owens Fellowship as an orientation officer. So this year, I remember what it was like to be a Brooke Owens Fellow, just beginning in the program. And I'm using that experience to help initiate new Brooke Owens Fellows into the program. I write regular newsletters with my co-officer, and at the Brooke Owens Fellowship, we have what's known as a Hitchhiker's Guide for Brookies, which is essentially like a starter guide to the aerospace industry for Brooke Owens Fellows, and I help expand upon that. I help develop I help develop that guide for incoming Brooke Owens Fellows. I volunteer pretty regularly at space events, space and aviation events at Purdue. Recently, I was involved with the solar eclipse event where we essentially had Boy Scouts over at Purdue, and we did a lot of solar eclipse centric activities, and we talked to them about safely viewing eclipses. And but yeah, I was involved with the Solar Eclipse Ambassadors program. That's what the official name is. That's what I did. And I was also involved with Purdue Space Day, essentially bringing aviation activities to high school students and middle school students in the greater Lafayette community, so they can, essentially feel what it's like to be an undergraduate student at Purdue. And even with the Society of Women Engineers, I've done quite a bit of outreach work, both in my capacity as the chair of the outreach committee and as a volunteering member at the organization. A lot of what we do at SWE is just helping to make space aviation, helping to make STEM more accessible to the wider community outside of Purdue. So yeah, quite a few volunteering commitments I've been involved in. I will credit that, I got my start as a volunteer when I was 14, 15 years old. when I volunteered at the local Sharjah Planetarium back home
Yeah.
at the United Arab Emirates. I essentially worked as a science communication volunteer. I would take the planetarium visitors around. I would talk to them about the exhibits. And I also gave multiple presentations, one such being we had a blood moon event at the planetarium. So setting up a telescope and talking to people, telling them about what they're seeing through the telescope and how it's significant, and just helping people learn more about the worlds beyond our own. But yeah, just most of my volunteer work is centered around talking to young professionals, talking to young audiences, about my own passion and hoping that it sticks and hoping that they see themselves in me, and hoping that they identify similar passions in their life and they feel empowered to pursue those passions in the way that I did when I was young.
Wow, this is really,
Yep.
really great. I have one last question for you. What
Mhm.
is your favorite part of working in aerospace and working in this industry?
The favorite part, okay, my favorite part about working in space and aviation.
Yeah.
So I love that it's challenging. I've always been fascinated with the idea that space is the final frontier of human, science and technology, pretty much. Um, all the engineering, all the laws of physics that we adhere to on Earth, that we build our machines, that we build everything around, becomes completely upside down when you go to space. There's no
Yeah.
gravity, it's vacuum, and it's incredibly different, and that always fascinated me because you're changing essentially the rules, right? And thinking about ways to make equipment that works on Earth just fine work in space as well, but under constraint to these completely different rules, really excited me as a kid. I was especially fascinated by the idea of microgravity, or as colloquially it is said, zero gravity,
Yeah.
even though it is truly just a zero. That led me to applying to this competition when I was 15 years old, with the Mohammed bin Rashid Space Center, which is kind of like the NASA of the UAE. They had a competition where they were inviting high school students and undergraduate students across the UAE, to come up with an experiment that they would like to test on board a microgravity simulating parabolic flight, which is kind of a mouthful. It's essentially a flight that travels in a parabola, and as it approaches the parabola and goes back down, it simulates the feeling of free fall or
Right.
weightlessness, which is what astronauts experience on board the ISS. And I built an experiment that would test the Archimedes principle of buoyancy in reduced gravity
Wow.
conditions. Essentially asking the question, when we were kids, one really fun thing that I would like to do, I don't know about you, when I went swimming or when I went to the beach with my family, I would always take an object that floats on the water, like, a ping pong ball, for example, and I would try to push it in like as deep as possible, and then I would watch it come back up
Yeah.
because it's an object that floats, right? And so, it always fascinated me as a kid. And I asked myself, okay, we know that the ping pong ball, when you pull it to the bottom of any, like, water body, it comes back up to the top. But that's only on Earth. What happens if you do the same thing in zero gravity conditions?
Right.
Does the ball still come back up top? What do you think? Does it come back up to the top, or
No, I don't think the ball comes back up to the top.
That's a great answer. So that's what I set to uncover for myself when I
Right.
built my experiment. And, I was one of the 13 winners of that competition, and it was really exciting. They said I could not just test my experiment, but I could also experience zero gravity,
Wow.
on the Vomit Comet, essentially what it's called. It's where astronauts train, to get the feeling of space before they actually go into space themselves. So that was a really cool experience, and I think that was the day I really decided, yeah, I'm gonna become an astronaut. I'm tired of gravity, and I want to go into a zero gravity environment. So yeah, but yeah, I remember going, being excited about that, and when I tested my experiment, just like you said, the ball doesn't come back up top. It doesn't float in the absence of gravity. So that was really cool to see, and that's what's always excited me about engineering. That's always what's excited me about specifically engineering for space, engineering for aviation, because it's such a different environment.
Yeah.
to what we're used to on Earth. And, essentially building objects, building machines to function in this completely different environment was always exciting to me. And that excites me to this day.
Wow. That's such an amazing story. And it's really awesome that there was an experiment dedicated for high school students to interact with environments that real astronauts actually do. All right.
Yeah, absolutely.
This will actually be my last question because I just enjoy talking to you so much.
All good.
I was wondering whether you had any advice for your high school self or high schoolers in general.
Any advice for high school students? I will say that as a high school student, I was incredibly worried. Obviously, when you have these big dreams, when you have these big plans, there's constantly the question of like, is it all going to work out?
Yeah.
Is this all, am I going to get into a good university? Am I going to be able to pursue the major of my dreams? Am I going to be able to make the most of my time in university? Am I going to survive living that far away from my parents? There are lots of questions that plague your mind when you're a high school student, and they plagued me too. I was really nervous. I was going to be moving. I'm current, like where I'm sitting right now and talking to you. I am 7,300 miles away from my family in the UAE. I did the math. Wow. And I was so nervous. I was like, I don't know if I'm going to survive being that far away from my parents, being that far away from my family, and having to get used to a completely different new country. And the advice that I would have the advice that I have for my high school self is it works out. It'll all work out. It's easy to lose track of the why, and it's easy to lose track of the passion when you're so caught up in all these little details, when you're caught up in all these little anxieties, little fears. But it's important to remember when you're doing something like pursuing your passion, when you're doing something like, essentially making sure you're giving it your 100% and committing yourself to your passion 100% without any distractions, it works out. It'll all work out. I got into Purdue. I'm pursuing my dream major. I'm working at Delta. Never thought I would be able to do that as an international student. Never thought I would even get an internship as an international student. But now I have not just one, but I have a co-op and an internship on my resume. So those are things I always worried about. And if it's one thing I would tell high school students, and if it's one thing I would tell myself, it'll work out. Everything eventually works out. All your dreams, if you commit yourself to the pursuit of your dreams, they will work out.
Thank you so much, Thendral. If you're interested in booking Thendral as a speaker for your community center or high school or as an individual mentor, please visit mynetworkher.org. All right.